For as often as we talk about gun violence in this country, which is far too often, we're rarely able to really get into the many complexities of each situation, the effect of shootings on families and communities, and the societal elements that contribute. Once again today, images of a school shooting suspect are everywhere, along with those of his parents, after 4 students were killed at Oxford High School in Michigan.
This country's latest deadly school shooting.
A high school shooting.
At yet another school, students, teachers, and parents terrified.
The accused shooter faces 4 counts of first-degree murder, and his parents are charged with involuntary manslaughter, accused of buying a gun for their son and then ignoring serious warning signs after. And then you know who else is getting a lot of attention today? Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky for the so-called Christmas photo in which he asked Santa for ammo, a post he thought it was appropriate to share just days after the Oxford murders. I guess in Massey's defense, nearly any time is in close proximity to a mass shooting event these days. But a new collaboration aims to, as they put it, change the narrative on gun violence in this country. It's a joint initiative between Emerson College, the Center for Gun Violence Prevention at Mass General, and the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. That last group was founded by chaplain Clementina Chéry after her son was shot and killed on Christmas Eve 28 years ago. She's joined me many times, including a few years back, with a very different narrative alongside the man who killed her son.
We are all impacted when violence happens. It is not just the individual. This is not just a black child that's in guns and drugs. This is a part of society. And by extending and showing who we are as human beings, it is an example. This is a human issue. People are dying every single day.
Clementina Chéry, President and CEO of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, joins me now along with Dr. Peter Masiakos, pediatric general and thoracic surgeon at Mass General Hospital, an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, and Eric Gordon, who's professor of civic media and director of the engagement lab at Emerson College. Welcome to all 3 of you. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Tina,
Thank you.
if I can start with you, in your announcement last week, as I said, you said the goal is, all 3 of you said, the goal is to change the narrative around gun violence. What does that mean?
What does it mean? Oh my God, for me, it means exactly that. Homicides continue to happen. CDC is telling us violence is happening. There's a reason why it's happening, but we always focus on the person that committed the crime. And so we tend to forget that they're human beings that are left behind, and then nothing changes. We still put attention and we sensationalize the act, and we forget about the impact and the ongoing people that are behind, that are impacted by that gun violence. And especially if you look like me. So for us, it's changing the narrative. Violence has impacted me, and it continues to impact me. I don't want to give attention to that. I want to shift the narrative and focus on the healing and what else can we do to address the issue of the gun violence.
And Eric, one of the reasons I think the 3 of you believe that the narrative is as skewed as it is because we in the media do a rotten job. The example I think the 3 of you and Dr. Sachs posited in a piece you wrote for the Dorchester Reporter, I believe, was, I think it was in early November, 3 police officers were shot by a man who had a long history of mental illness. He was killed. What did we get so wrong there?
Well, the question is not so much what the media got wrong, but what the focus of the media attention was, right? So the details were correct, but if we have limited media space and limited attention spans, what are we spending our time on? And what can we do to tell that story a little bit differently about the why? You know, what about the backstory? What about the mental health, the real mental health challenges this man was going through? How do we focus on that? That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to change what the media focuses on, not so much the accuracy.
You know, and Doctor, in this initial release that the 3 of you put out, you said we have an obligation to understand the causes and social determinants. Too many guns, too much poverty, too few opportunities. Do you think the average consumer of information about these horrors doesn't get that enough?
I don't know that it's not gotten by the consumer. I think the consumer clearly gets it because the public opinion is on the side of trying to figure out what's going on and how to fix it. And I think for the same reasons that Eric reports that we have a difficult time understanding what the reality of gun violence is, and how Tina expresses for the people that have consistently been the victims of violence to be dismissed by bylines is really one of the issues that we have. And our patients, these are our lifelong patients. And you started this segment with the idea of a horrible, horrible thing that happened in Michigan. And in fact, the last time I was on your show, a horrible, horrible thing happened in Sandy Hook, or the horrible, horrible thing that happened in Columbine before that. But the reality is that on that day, and it's how horrific it is for 4 children who were celebrating Thanksgiving with their families just a few weeks ago can't celebrate the Merry Christmas that Congressman Massey posted on his card. The reality is on that day, 8 other children were killed. And they didn't get a story. And 100 other Americans died, and they didn't get a story. Yeah. And so, these patients that we deal with psychological problems after their gun violence, gunshots, and the victims' families that deal with the consequences of a lost loved one last for our whole careers. And it just ends at the emergency department. Like Tina's son's life ended at the emergency department. And nobody thought of Tina after that.
Tina, speaking of your son's life, I played that video that I still can't get over, and I've seen you at some of your Mother's Day walks for peace with a man who killed your son. I have never heard anybody other than you and the former police commissioner, Bill Evans, talk about the family, the 2 families suffered, not just your family as the lost your son, but the shooter's family as well. Is that an important part that we have to start integrating into these narratives?
We must integrate into the narratives. This city, this country invests in addressing the issue of gang violence. And we invest and we invest. We invest police, we invest prosecution, we invest prison, we invest street workers. We have all these programs. When these same young men end up dead, then it's their entire criminal record, and then it's the family. So the cycle continues to happen. So yes, it's way deeper than the gun, it's way deeper than the gang. It's a societal issue.
Yeah. Doctor, I want to...
Because I always feel, what if it was my son who was dealing with the issue of guns and gangs? What would I want? So we need to include families.
Doctor, in terms of the victims and how we define victims, I have to say, Karen McDonald, who is the prosecutor in this Michigan shooting case, even though, in my opinion, she's doing far too many interviews, but that's just one man's opinion. I thought she nailed it when she was asked early on about why she had filed terrorism charges against the shooter in this case, too. Here's part of what she had to say.
When we sat down and talked about the charges that were applicable in this case, the children that I have just listed and those that were injured, they're the victims in the first-degree murder charges and the assault with intent to murder. But what about all these other children? What about all the children who ran, screaming, hiding under desks? What about all the children at home right now who can't eat and can't sleep and can't imagine a world where they could ever foot back in that school? Those are victims too, and so are their families, and so is the community. And the charge of terrorism reflects that.
Forget the criminal charge, Doctor. I'm not asking about that. But what she is describing is in part why this collaboration exists, is it not?
It is. It is precisely why this collaboration exists. It's beyond the scope of the kids who are running from a guy with a gun. It is exactly the reason that we have Alice drills. And every year, kids have to face the consequences of learning how to escape from an intruder at a school, which should be the safest place in their lives. However, that said, every day in neighborhoods of color, in Boston, which is supposed to be the safest city of the safest state in the country, every day, kids in neighborhoods of color can't walk to school because they're dodging bullets. They can't fall asleep because they're listening to gunfire. And so we have to do this better, and we have to ask the people who are invested in it to help us.
You know, Eric, there seems to be a consensus, not only, I think, among the three of you, but also in the larger society, is we spend far too much time talking about the perpetrator and too little time about everything else. One extreme example of that is Anderson Cooper, and I'm a huge fan of his, but I find it odd, to say the least. He will never even mention the name of a shooter or show his or her picture. Is that going too far, or is that the kind of thing that might be helpful?
I think it might be helpful, because I think what it does is that it shifts our focus on that national scale. And I don't know that Anderson Cooper is successfully actually spending the time that would have been spent on that shooter on the other things that we're talking about here, on the real impacts on families and communities. I wish that was the case, but maybe that's the kind of model that others of us should follow.
You know, Tina, who's the audience for this? I'm assuming this collaboration was not created with the thought that all of a sudden anti-gun reform legislators are going to have an epiphany. I assume this is more about changing the mindset and the culture around these things. Is that a fair statement?
That is, because, I mean, again, I've been at this 28 years. 28 years. I've done the gun control. I've done the HBO, 5 American handguns, 5 American kids. I've talked to legislators. I've testified. This is about a human rights issue. How do we begin to treat each other with dignity and compassion? And how do I see the next person is my neighbor? What is my responsibility to my neighbor? Our children are in school. A child does not wake up and then wants to kill. There are all of these signs that are there. What's our responsibility? So the audience is these young people, these students may be journalists. They may go into this world. The community is there. They're waiting to be a part of that. So the three of us have made a commitment. It's not just me. We had over 250 participants that want to be involved in something. We don't have the answer, but working together, providing a space, and then showing the assets, providing healing modalities. Violence is still happening. It is not going anywhere. Our role is to make sure, what can we do to make sure you as a family, you as a community have what you need? And then we hold systems accountable. Then we educate. Again, we're still responding 500 homicides in Philadelphia. Families are not being treated effective and equitable because of their criminal record. So how do we equip the hospitals to respond? How do we help the media to respond? And then how do we make sure our cities and our elected officials have the tools that they need to do to respond to the families? Looking at what the Center for Disease Control says, looking at what the research says, in order to interrupt cycles of intervention must happen at multiple levels. So here you have, listen to this, 2 white men and a black woman. It sounds like a story in a bar, right? So we are in this together. I've done as much as I could do. Understood. But now I have a medical institution and a higher learning institution.
Tina Chéry, it's 3 white guys and a black woman, but you were close. Tina, Eric, I have 10 seconds, doctor. It's all I got.
So I tell you, this education spans the gamut here. We as medical providers are trying to ask the questions, why do you want a gun? Why do you need a gun? Do you have access to a gun? Mm-hmm. And why is it there in a sense of a demented adult? And in fact, we're not asking the questions right because we're not asking the people who know the answers to those questions, which is why Tina's here and Eric is here.
We got to go. I wish you, all 3 of you, a lot of luck. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.